Hey, step away from that vehicle. You don't look like the owner to me.
Excuse me? I am standing right here pumping my gas.
Drop the attitude, pal. You fit the description, so stop resisting.
Agent, look at the government plates right now.
I don't care what you say. Turn around, you're in cuffs.
You put a hand on me, son, and you lose that badge.
Turn around. Hands where I can see them. Now. Caleb Mallory's voice cut through the gas station forecourt like a siren loud enough to make heads snap from the pumps. His hand hovered near his holster like he'd practiced this part in a mirror. Maurice Nguyen froze with a receipt still pinched between two fingers, the paper fluttering in the air from the rush of his breath. He was standing beside Pump, 6/2 a step away from his government sedan, and the rookie cop had positioned himself between Maurice and the driver's door like he owned the space. "You've been circling this lot," Mallory said, eyes narrowed, chin tipped down. "That's suspicious. You're matching a description." Maurice kept his palms open, shoulders tight, swallowing once. "Officer, what's the reason I'm being stopped? Am I free to leave?" Mallory's gaze flicked to Maurice's waist, then to the car, then back to Maurice's face. "Don't play games. If you move, I'll put you in cuffs." Right there, between the accusation and the threat, was the promise hanging in the air like a storm cloud within days. That claim would collapse, and the same words Mallory just used would return to him in a room full of people who did not care about his pride. The gas station's canopy lights made everything harsh and flat, turning faces into masks. A woman near the air pump slowed her steps phone, already lifting, without thinking. A delivery driver at Pump 4 stopped his card transaction mid-beep and stared. Maurice's dry mouth made his next sentence come out softer than he intended. "Please state the reason. I'm not resisting." Mallory took a step in invading the space. Back up from the vehicle. Maurice shifted one heel back, careful controlled. "I'm requesting a supervisor." Mallory's lips tightened like he'd just been insulted. "You don't get to make demands. Not here." By the 6th paragraph, the proof pressure arrived in the simplest, oldest form witnesses. Phones were up now, 2, then 3, held at chest level steady. One man in a reflective vest angled his camera so both Maurice and Mallory fit in frame, and he said calm and loud enough to be heard he's not resisting. He asked why. Mallory's eyes snapped toward the phones. His posture didn't soften, but his breathing changed. "Put your phones away. This is police business." A woman by the convenience store door didn't budge. "We're in public," she said. "We can record." Mallory's jaw worked. He leaned closer to Maurice, voice dropping into that private threat register cops use when they want the crowd to stop being brave. "Last warning. Stop arguing or you're going to jail." Maurice's hands trembled just once before he forced them still. He could feel heat rise up his neck, that mix of humiliation and anger that made it hard to swallow. He'd come to this station for a quick refill and a coffee before heading back to an office where people expected him to show up with answers, not handcuff marks. Officer Maurice said measured, "Am I being detained?" "What's the reason?" Mallory lifted his radio mic as if the question itself was the threat. "Dispatch, I've got a subject refusing lawful orders, possibly casing vehicles." The delivery driver at Pump 4 blinked, then said, "He just got out of his car and went inside." Mallory ignored him, eyes locked on Morris like the witnesses were background noise. "Step away and interlace your fingers behind your head." Maurice did not comply with that command because he understood what it did. It turned a conversation into submission on camera. He kept his hands visible at chest height instead. "I don't consent. I'm requesting a supervisor." Mallory's face hardened. He said it clearly, loudly, the line that would become a caption later, "You don't look like you belong here, so cooperate." The phones didn't lower. If anything, they rose a fraction higher. That single sentence landed in the air and Maurice felt it in his chest like a bruise forming. A teenage cashier peeked out from the store window, eyes wide. An older man near the trash can muttered "damn" under his breath like he couldn't help it. Mallory's hand moved fast to Maurice's wrist. It wasn't a strike, not a punch. It was the point of no return, the first physical control grab done in front of strangers, done with certainty that nobody would challenge it. "Don't touch me," Maurice said, voice low but clear. "I'm not resisting." Mallory tightened his grip anyway, twisting Morris's arm outward just enough to make his shoulder pinch. "Then do what you're told." A man in a hoodie stepped closer, but stopped short, uncertainty flashing across his face. Social courage has a cost, and for a second the crowd teetered on that edge where someone decides it's safer to look away. The woman at the door, the one still recording, didn't hesitate. She spoke in that steady witness voice. "He's asking for a supervisor. You didn't explain anything." Mallory's head snapped toward her. "Back up, right now!" She took one step back, not because she was scared, but because she knew staying put would give Mallory a new excuse. Her phone remained aimed like a spotlight. Maurice's mind was trying to do 3 jobs at once: stay calm, stay safe, stay documented. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could taste coffee he hadn't even finished. And in the middle of it, a small imperfection hit the gas station's overhead. Speakers crackled and blared a promotional announcement from inside the store. Some automated line about rewards points drowning out a few seconds of Mallory's words. It wasn't dramatic. It was just enough to cause the delivery driver to tilt his head and say, "What did he just order?" and for confusion to ripple through the people who wanted to help. Mallory used that confusion immediately. I told him to step back and he refused. He announced louder, as if volume could rewrite what the phones had already captured. Maurice's voice stayed even, but his throat tightened. "I couldn't hear you. The speaker, please repeat the reason." Mallory's eyes narrowed like the inconvenience was deliberate. "You heard me fine." That refusal to acknowledge the obvious was the bias showing through professionalism. He didn't want clarity. He wanted compliance. Maurice's government sedan sat there with a plain exterior, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed authority. Maurice didn't carry himself like a cop. He carried himself like a man who spent his day reading reports, interviewing people, and trying to keep paperwork aligned with reality. He was also, in the most grounded sense, tired. He'd worked late the previous night, the kind of late where the building empties out and the cleaning crew becomes the only other humans left. He'd promised his sister he'd check in on their mom after work today because she'd been skipping meals again, and Maurice had already packed a small grocery bag in his trunk rice broth fruit cups because he knew she'd accept food more easily than worry. Those were the kinds of responsibilities that made him careful about time, about conflict, about anything that could spill into a longer problem. But the humiliation was triggering something deeper too, something he rarely talked about. Maurice had built his whole adult routine around being reliable. 2 alarms, same thermos, same navy jacket with the worn zipper. Same habit of parking in the far end of lots so he didn't ding someone else's door. He was the guy coworkers called when they needed someone to double-check a detail before a meeting. The idea of being framed as suspicious over nothing wasn't just insulting, it was dangerous in a way his body understood instantly. Mallory's grip shifted again, pushing Morris toward the curb near the trash can. "You're being detained," he said like it was a punishment for failure to comply. Maurice's shoulders tensed. "I'm requesting a supervisor. I'm not resisting. Please state the reason." Mallory pressed the radio button again. "Send me a unit. Subject's escalating." A bystander, middle-aged baseball cap, hands full of windshield washer fluid, hesitated, then made a mistake that changed the air. "Officer," he called out, trying to be helpful. "Maybe he's just nervous. People get nervous when cops show up." Mallory seized it like proof. Exactly. Nervous people are hiding something. Maurice turned his head just enough to address the man without breaking the posture of safety. "Sir, I'm nervous because he grabbed me for no reason." The man's eyes flickered, embarrassed. "Yeah, okay." He backed away, not wanting to be part of it anymore. That was the social friction in real time, a crowd trying to help, but one wrong assumption giving the authority figure cover. Then the solidarity engine locked in. A new voice, closer firm, announced itself. "Everybody keep recording. Keep it calm." It was a woman in a gray blazer, hair pulled back, a lanyard bouncing at her chest. Someone who moved like she had handled chaos before. She didn't touch Mallory. She didn't shout. She simply stepped into the edges of the scene and created a witness circle by presence alone. People mirrored her calm like it was permission. Mallory bristled. "Ma'am, back up." She held her ground at a legal safe distance. "I'm not interfering. I'm documenting. You need to tell him why he's detained." Mallory's eyes flicked from her to the phones again. The crowd wasn't yelling. That was the problem. Calm witnesses are harder to dismiss. Maurice's hands were still visible, fingers slightly curled from tension. "Officer," he said again, "am I free to leave?" "No," Mallory snapped. "You're not." That single word caught by multiple devices would matter later because it drew a clean line between a voluntary conversation and a detention. A second imperfection arrived smaller, but with consequence, Mallory's radio sputtered with bad reception under the canopy, turning dispatch responses into clipped syllables. He had to repeat himself twice, growing more irritated with each attempt. It delayed the arrival of backup by minutes that felt like hours, and in that delay, Mallory leaned harder into control. "Hands behind your back," he ordered. Maurice didn't move. His voice lowered. "I'm not resisting. I don't consent to being searched. I want a supervisor." Mallory's face went red at the edges. "You're making this worse for yourself." The woman in the blazer said he's not making it worse. "You are." Mallory stepped forward like he might redirect the aggression toward her, then stopped when he saw 3 phones angle to include her face too. He wasn't afraid of force. He was afraid of footage. This is the moment it turned. Not because Mallory backed down, he didn't, but because the crowd stopped being an audience and became a record. A patrol SUV rolled in and parked crooked near the entrance lights, not fully engaged, but present enough to signal escalation. A second officer, older, tired eyes, stepped out and scanned the scene like he was counting problems. Mallory spoke fast, trying to control the narrative before the new officer asked questions. He was circling, acting suspicious, refusing orders. The older officer looked at Maurice's posture, open hands, feet planted, no aggressive motion, then looked at the phones. "What's his name?" Mallory blinked. "He hasn't given it." "Maurice said my name is Maurice Nguyen. What's the reason?" The older officer turned to Mallory. "Did you ask for ID?" Mallory's shoulders rose. He refused to cooperate. Maurice didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask. He grabbed my wrist and told me I didn't belong. Mallory cut in sharp. "I didn't say that." From the witness circle, the woman at the door said, "Yes, you did. She didn't embellish. She didn't add commentary. You said you don't look like you belong here, so cooperate." Mallory's head snapped toward her eyes wide for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected the crowd to repeat words accurately. He'd expected noise. The older officer exhaled through his nose, then said to Maurice, "Sir, do you have identification?" Maurice nodded slowly. "Yes, it's in my wallet." "May I reach for it?" The older officer held up a hand, caution. "Slow. Tell me where it is." "In my back pocket." Mallory stepped in again, eager to regain control. "I'll retrieve it." Maurice's shoulders tightened. "I don't consent to being searched." Mallory's eyes hardened. "You don't get to consent." The older officer cut across him, not loud, just authoritative. "Hold on." He looked at Maurice. "Sir, if you can show ID without sudden movement, do it." Maurice moved like his joints were made of glass, careful, deliberate. He pulled out his wallet, then produced a credential card, plain official, not flashy, and held it up. Mallory leaned in, squinting, then dismissed it immediately. Fake. It wasn't even a considered judgment. It was selective proof rejection. Any evidence that didn't fit Mallory's story was automatically invalid. The crowd reacted not with shouts, but with a murmur that carried disbelief. The delivery driver said, "Come on." The woman in the blazer stepped half a pace closer, still not interfering, voice steady. "You didn't even read it." Mallory snapped back with coded framing, the kind that turns bias into policy. "We have standards. This is a high theft area. People like him use fake badges." Maurice's jaw tightened. He could feel his pulse in his tongue. "Officer, I'm requesting a supervisor. I want your badge number." Mallory's eyes flashed. "You're not in charge here." The older officer looked uncomfortable, like he'd just been handed a live wire. He glanced toward his patrol SUV, then at Mallory. "Let's slow down. What exactly is the suspicion?" Mallory spoke over him. "He's refusing orders. He's escalating." Maurice's voice stayed calm, but his hands shook slightly around the wallet. "I came here for gas. I went inside. I got a receipt. He stopped me. I asked why." The witness circle did what witness circles do. It narrated reality in plain words, so it couldn't be rewritten. "He was literally standing there," the delivery driver said. "Not running, not hiding." He asked if he was free to leave. The woman at the door added, "You said no." Mallory's posture tightened. He hated being corrected in front of civilians. He took a breath, then made a choice that pushed the scene toward the near loss. "Fine," he said, voice flat with anger. "Turn around. You're under arrest for obstruction." The words hit Maurice like a cold splash. His stomach dropped. He could almost feel the cuffs already, the pressure on wrists, the way a photo would travel through office whispers before anyone knew the truth. Maurice swallowed hard. "I'm not resisting," he said softer now. "Please don't do this. I want a supervisor." Mallory reached for his cuffs. Metal clicked, once bright under the canopy lights. The older officer hesitated. That hesitation mattered. It meant he wasn't fully on board, but he also wasn't stepping in yet. It was the space where arrests happen because nobody wants to challenge a colleague in public. The witness circle tightened without moving, and people adjusted their positions so their cameras had clear lines forming a quiet perimeter of accountability. The woman in the blazer said, "Everybody stay calm. Keep recording. Do not touch anyone." Mallory glared at her. "You're obstructing." She didn't flinch. "No, I'm documenting." Maurice's breath went shallow. His shoulders rose. The near loss was real now, one impulsive move, one misunderstood word, and Maurice would be in the back of a squad car with a charge that could take months to untangle. Then a new person arrived with leverage, not a superhero, not a miracle, just someone whose job was literally to answer calls like this. A white SUV with municipal markings pulled in fast, braking hard near the curb. A security supervisor from the strip mall stepped out, radio clipped to his shoulder, scanning the scene with a practiced, irritated calm. He wasn't police, but he owned the property relationship, the cameras, the customer complaints, the calls that turned into liability. He walked straight toward the officer's palms open, voice firm. What's going on? Mallory snapped, police business. Step back. The security supervisor didn't step back. He stopped at a respectful distance, eyes on the cuffs in Mallory's hand. This is our forecourt. If someone's being arrested, I need to know why. My team is getting calls. The older officer spoke first, trying to sound reasonable. We're investigating suspicious activity. The security supervisor looked past them to Maurice. Sir, did you buy something? Maurice held up the receipt, still pinched in his fingers like a fragile flag. Yes, Mallory scoffed. Receipts don't prove anything. The security supervisor's eyes narrowed. We have cameras. Mallory's expression shifted just a fraction because he understood what cameras meant. Not debate, not narrative, just replay. The security supervisor turned to the older officer. If you need footage preserved, say it now. If you're arresting a paying customer on our property, my manager is going to ask for the reason. Mallory tried to overpower the moment with authority. I don't need your permission. The security supervisor didn't argue the power dynamic. He argued the reality. I didn't say permission, I said reason. Mallory's cheeks flushed. He made a sharp motion like he might snap the cuffs onto Maurice just to prove he could. And then the older officer finally stepped between them, slightly body-angled, in that subtle intervention way cops use when they want to stop another cop without making it look like a stop. Hold up, he said to Mallory. Let's get a supervisor. Mallory's eyes widened. I am handling it. The older officer kept his voice neutral. We're getting a supervisor. Mallory's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. He keyed his radio voice tight. Requesting a sergeant. Scene is getting out of control. The witness circle heard that and absorbed it. The officer who escalated was now blaming the public for the escalation. Maurice stood still, arms at his sides, now wrists aching from the earlier grip. He kept his voice low. Thank you, he said to the older officer, not gratitude for kindness, but for procedure. Mallory stared at Morris like he wanted him to apologize for existing. Don't thank him. You did this. Maurice didn't bite. I asked for the reason. The security supervisor spoke into his own radio quick and clipped. Send operations manager to the forecourt. Now. Minutes dragged. The canopy lights buzzed. Cars rolled in and out, drivers slowing when they saw the cluster of bodies. Some kept going, wanting no part of it. Others parked and watched phones rising like reflex. In that stretch, Maurice's backstory surfaced in the way it always does under humiliation, not a full biography, just a few sharp truths. He'd taken this job because stability mattered, because his family had lived too long with uncertainty. He'd worked extra shifts whenever he could, the kind of double shifting that makes a person feel like their body belongs to the schedule. He wasn't chasing power, he was chasing predictable paychecks, health insurance, the ability to show up when his mom needed someone at a clinic appointment. He didn't talk about it at work, because competence was his language, not pity. Mallory watched him, still searching for a crack, anger, fear, anything he could frame as aggression. What are you really doing here? He asked, as if the gas pump and receipt were props in a lie. Maurice answered like a man forcing calm through clenched teeth. Getting gas. That's it. Mallory's voice took on that client's and standard's edge, again coded and insulting without being explicit. People come through here looking for targets. We have standards. We protect regular customers. The delivery driver scoffed. He is a regular customer. I've seen him here. Mallory ignored that because it didn't help his story. A marked sergeant's vehicle finally pulled in. The sergeant, Nora Prescott, stepped out, scanning with the quick eyes of someone who reads crowds for danger and liability at the same time. She took in the phones, the security supervisor, the older officer's posture, Mallory's clenched stance, and Maurice's controlled stillness. Nora's first sentence was pure triage. Who's in charge of this stop? Mallory snapped, I am. He was suspicious and refused orders. Nora looked at Maurice. Sir, what happened? Mallory tried to cut in, but Nora lifted a hand without looking at him. One at a time. Maurice's mouth was dry again. He forced his voice steady. I was pumping gas. I went inside and bought coffee. I came back. Officer Mallory told me I didn't belong and to cooperate. He grabbed my wrist. I asked the reason and requested a supervisor. Mallory blurted, That's not what I said. From the witness circle, the woman at the door spoke up again, calm certain. It is what he said. Nora's eyes flicked to the phones, then back to the woman. Do you have it on video? The woman nodded. Yes. Mallory's face tightened. They're interfering. Nora's tone stayed controlled, but the authority in it was unmistakable. They're standing back and recording. That's not interference. She turned to Mallory. What's the description you're claiming he matches? Mallory hesitated. Male, dark clothing, acting nervous. Nora cut him off. That's not a description. That's a vibe. The older officer's shoulders dropped, slightly relief and dread mixed together. He knew what that meant. Nora was not here to protect Mallory's ego. She was here to protect the department from exactly this kind of mess. Nora looked at Maurice's credential card. Sir, what is this credential? It's my work credential, Maurice said carefully. I can provide identification. I requested you verify instead of arresting me. Mallory snapped, it's fake. Nora's eyes narrowed. Based on what? Mallory's answer was thin. Because people use fakes. Nora turned slightly to the security supervisor. You said you have cameras. The security supervisor nodded. Yes, and I can get you the footage. Nora said preserve it. Do not overwrite anything. I want that footage kept. That was the first documentary anchor spoken in the heat of the scene, not as a summary, a preservation step said out loud because the sergeant recognized the stakes. Mallory's eyes widened. He glanced at the phones again, then at Nora, as if realizing too late that this wasn't going to stay a private lesson. Nora shifted her stance toward the older officer. Did you see any crime? The older officer answered honestly because there was no safe lie left. No sergeant. Nora looked back at Mallory. Then why are your cuffs out? Mallory's throat bobbed. He refused to comply. Nora's voice sharpened just enough to cut. Comply with what Caleb Mallory? Using his first name in front of civilians was deliberate. It stripped the uniform down to a person accountable for choices. Mallory's eyes flashed with anger and embarrassment. With my orders. Nora didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Your orders must be tied to a reason. Say the reason. Mallory's silence stretched half a second too long. Then Nora looked at Maurice. Sir, are you injured? Maurice rotated his wrist slightly, a small wince he couldn't hide. My shoulder and wrist hurt. Nora nodded once. We'll document that. Mallory snapped defensive. I didn't hurt him. The security supervisor said he grabbed him. We all saw it. Nora looked at Mallory. Step back. Mallory stared at her like she'd betrayed him. Sergeant. Step back, Nora repeated firmer. Mallory took one step back, still rigid, still angry. The crowd exhaled collectively without realizing it. Nora turned to the witness circle. I need 2 witnesses willing to give statements. Not right now in the middle of this. I mean in a controlled way. The woman at the door said I will. The delivery driver said me too. Nora nodded. Good. Mallory tried again to regain narrative control. Sergeant, they're making a scene. This is why we can't do our jobs. Nora looked him in the eye. Your job includes explaining detentions. Maurice's shoulders lowered slightly. His throat still felt tight, but the immediate threat of cuffs had receded. He was still not free, not yet, but he was no longer alone. And then the internal split arrived. Quiet, plausible, bureaucratic. An operations manager from the strip mall walked up with a tablet in hand, face tense with that customer service panic that turns into liability fear. He greeted Nora, then glanced at the phones like he hated them. Sergeant, the manager said we'd like this resolved quickly. The station's getting crowded. Nora didn't blink. It will be resolved correctly. The manager's mouth tightened, but he nodded like he understood the difference. Mallory saw the manager's discomfort and tried to exploit it. Exactly. We need to clear the area. He can sort this out downtown. Maurice's stomach dropped again. There was the near loss's echo. No, he said softly but firmly. I'm not going downtown for buying coffee. Nora's gaze turned cold toward Mallory. He's not going downtown. Mallory's face flushed. So we just let suspicious people walk. Nora's response was blunt. We don't detain people based on don't belong. The crowd went quiet for half a beat, like everyone felt the line land. Mallory's eyes flicked again to the phones, then down, then back up, recalculating. Nora held out her hand to Maurice, palm open. Sir, may I see your driver's license? Maurice nodded. Yes, may I reach? She nodded. Slow. He handed it over. Nora looked at it, then handed it back. Thank you. Mallory's lips pressed tight, anger simmering under restraint. Nora turned to the older officer. You, she said, stand with Mr. Nguyen while I speak to Officer Mallory. The older officer nodded and moved slightly, positioning himself near Maurice in a protective procedural way. Mallory stiffened. I didn't do anything wrong. Nora's voice lowered. Then this will be easy. She guided Mallory a few steps away from the witness circle, not to hide him, but to reduce the performance pressure. Still phones remained aimed. The woman in the blazer, still calm, said quietly to the people around her, Keep it steady. Don't shout. Maurice stood under the canopy lights, breathing shallow, trying to let his hand stop shaking. The older officer looked at him and said almost apologetic, You did the right thing staying calm. Maurice's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't have a choice. Nora returned after a short, tense exchange with Mallory that left Mallory's face even redder. She addressed Maurice directly. Mr. Nguyen, you are not under arrest. You are free to leave. Maurice nodded once, but he didn't move immediately. He answered the why not just leave question with his body. He didn't bolt because he knew leaving too fast could be framed as flight. He stayed because he needed the record, the names, the accountability. Maurice's voice was steady. Thank you. I would like the names and badge numbers of the officers involved. Nora nodded. You'll get them through the report process, and I want you to know we're going to address this. Mallory's head snapped toward Nora. Sergeant, Nora cut him off with a look. Not here. The security supervisor stepped in again, voice firm. Sergeant, do you want us to pull the footage now? Nora nodded. Yes, preserve it and provide it through proper channels. Then she turned to the witnesses. If you're willing, I need your contact information so someone can follow up. The witnesses agreed one by one, and the phones finally lowered as the immediate danger passed. Maurice walked to his car slowly. His wrist ached. His face felt hot. He sat behind the wheel and stared at his hands for a second before starting the engine, letting the adrenaline drain in a shaky wave. The first fallout didn't happen with a dramatic siren. It happened with calls, emails, and quiet institutional motion. Nora Prescott filed the incident upward. The operations manager escalated it to corporate risk because customers had recorded it. The security supervisor flagged the situation to his leadership because footage involved police contact on contracted property. Maurice, at his next stop, didn't go straight to his office. He parked, took a breath, and made the call he'd been avoiding. He contacted his own leadership the way he was trained to through proper channels, with facts, not fury. He told them there had been an unlawful detention attempt, a physical grab, and a threatened arrest. He told them witnesses had video. He told them a sergeant had ordered preservation of footage. His voice stayed controlled, but his hands shook so hard he had to hold the phone with both hands. His supervisor listened without interrupting, then said, "Do not handle this alone." Within hours, institutional backbone began to appear around Maurice not as a mob, but as structure. A senior operations manager from Maurice's agency contacted local leadership to verify facts and ensure his safety. A legal counsel named only by role advised Maurice on what to say and what not to say, and reminded him to keep everything in plain language. Ask the reason, request a supervisor, do not consent, do not resist. The police department's watch commander was notified because the incident involved a threatened arrest without a clear reason and because multiple civilian videos existed. A complaint intake officer scheduled witness interviews. The strip mall's corporate risk manager requested the preserved footage formally because that property's interests were suddenly aligned with truth-bad stops turn into payouts, and payouts turn into policy changes. Maurice's double-shift backstory surfaced again, smaller, sharper. He still went to his mom's place that night. He still carried the grocery bag inside. He still helped her set out a bowl of broth. But when she asked why he was quiet, he didn't give her the details. He just said long day because he didn't want her to carry the weight of a world that treated him as suspicious by default. His shoulder hurt when he reached for the cabinet, and he hid the wince like it was nothing. The review process didn't move like a movie. It moved like an institution protecting itself while deciding how honest it would be. There was internal friction. One supervisor wanted to keep this local to resolve it quietly to avoid headlines. Another higher-up wanted it correct, because correct was the only thing that wouldn't explode later. A meeting was scheduled with named roles in the room: a department lieutenant, an internal affairs investigator, a city risk manager, and counsel representing the city's interests. The strip mall's operations manager joined by phone. Nora Prescott provided her account. The older officer provided his. Witnesses were interviewed. And then the viral quote came back. Not as internet noise, but as a line spoken in a room that mattered. A witness, calm, clear, repeated it word for word. He said, "You don't look like you belong here, so cooperate." The room went still. Not dramatic still. Administrative still, the kind where everyone realizes the story just became expensive. That was the freeze moment. Pens paused, eyes lifted, and the air felt thick as the truth landed. Phones weren't up in that room, but the effect was the same. The internal affairs investigator looked at Mallory's report draft, because of course there was one, and then looked up. "Where in your report do you explain the reason for detention?" Mallory called in, later tried to defend himself the way rookies do when they're scared. He said high crime area suspicious behavior refused orders and standards. The lieutenant's tone was flat. "Those are words. We need reasons." The city risk manager asked a simple question. Was there any actual allegation of a crime before contact? Silence answered first. The strip mall's operations manager, now less concerned about crowding and more concerned about liability, said into the speakerphone, "Our footage shows him entering the store, purchasing, returning to his vehicle. No loitering, no circling. The department counsel didn't grandstand. They didn't threaten. They did what counsel does. They asked for preservation of all relevant footage and statements, and directed that communications be handled carefully because public trust was now part of the harm. Maurice sat through parts of the process with his own support present, shoulders squared, but face tired. He didn't want vengeance. He wanted the narrative corrected and the behavior stopped. When the city finally moved toward resolution, it came in the form of accountability that institutions understand. There was a quiet settlement, not a celebration, not a lottery ticket, but a recognition that what happened carried cost. There was a written apology that did not hide behind "if you felt," but acknowledged improper detention and inappropriate language. There was an update in department training emphasis. Plain language, not policy numbers, about explaining reasons not escalating based on belonging, and recognizing that calm assertion of boundaries is not obstruction. Officer Caleb Mallory did not disappear into a cinematic punishment. He faced stepwise consequences, remedial training, a documented performance action, and removal from solo patrol for a period while supervision increased. Nora Prescott's intervention was noted as proper, and the older officer's hesitation became a learning point rather than a secret. The gas station kept its footage preserved as requested. The security supervisor's role was acknowledged in writing by his company leadership because his calm insistence on cameras had protected everyone in the chain. The witnesses were thanked formally for cooperation because their steady narration had made the difference. Maurice received a letter clearing him of wrongdoing, written in plain words, suitable for his own file and peace of mind. The apology didn't erase the heat in his face under that canopy, or the pain in his wrist, or the way his hands shook when the cuffs clicked. But it restored something that mattered: dignity, publicly and institutionally, not just privately. Weeks later, Maurice returned to that gas station not to prove anything to anyone, but because it was on his route, because he refused to let one bad stop steal his normal life. He pumped gas under the same harsh lights, heard the same buzz of the canopy, and this time nobody told him he didn't belong. The record had done its job. The institution, pressured by witnesses and risk, had done its job. And a rookie cop learned the hard way that control without reason isn't authority, it's liability. What happened at that gas station is the kind of encounter that can spin into chaos fast, especially when an authority figure treats belonging like evidence. The most effective resistance in moments like that is rarely loud. It's structured, calm, and collective, because structure creates accountability, and collective presence creates safety. Practical takeaways mandatory. First, keep your hands visible and use steady phrases like, "What's the reason?" and "Am I free to leave?" so the record is clear even if emotions run hot. Next, request a supervisor early and repeat the request without arguing about side issues, because the request itself forces a decision point. Then, if safe and legal, where you are, let witnesses record and narrate calmly short lines like "he's not resisting" and "you didn't explain the reason" can prevent a false story from forming. After that, avoid sudden movements and ask before reaching for your wallet or phone, because misunderstandings in tense moments can escalate quickly. Finally, as soon as you are safe, write down names, times, and what was said in plain language, and route complaints through formal channels so the institution has to respond on the record. Some elements are selectively fictionalized for education.